The three buildings over my shoulder, the one down on the far right was the Pettibone Drugs and Grocers. That later became the Healy's building, which many generations remember going to Healy's Grocers, and then the post office in the center. And then over on the far left, it was the last of the buildings to be built around 1908, and that was actually the equivalent of a hardware store. And then the little add-on purple section was probably, I think, in the 70s or the 80s.
All right, we're down here at the depot section in Manchester with Sean Harrington of the Manchester Historical Society today. We're going to give us a little tour of the historic depot section of Manchester. We're right here at the corner of Highland Avenue and Elm Street, and there's this handy map and plaque here. And Sean, tell us a little bit about the neighborhood down here. These are some fairly old buildings, it looks like we're looking at.
Yeah, it's fairly old. I mean, the depot was the last of the major areas of Manchester developed. It really started in 1852 when the railroad came through, and there was really just the station until about 1867 when W.H. Fullerton came from Dorset and built his marble and granite works.
So that would be down the other side of Depot Street there by the R.K. Miles lumberyard there.
Exactly. It's actually the R.K. Miles corporate offices, and then he built a general store, which is today's Firefly.
Okay.
And those were really the first two commercial buildings in the depot, and they were really standalone. And then Gilbert Bradley built his residence there, and everybody thought he was crazy. Built this beautiful Victorian residence, and it's today Yarns for the Soul. And if you look at, you can see it's built in the same style as almost a North Shore bookstore.
Okay.
And they wanted to continue developing the commercial part of the depot, so they opened a brickyard, and they built what's today's Robbins Lane there. And then a couple of years later, his partner, John C. Blackmer, who's actually this gentleman, this fine dapper gentleman sitting right here smoking the pipe, who was also the postmaster of Manchester Depot from 1874 through 1894, I think.
Oh.
He built the New York store in 1876. The sign on the front of the building says 1886. It's actually incorrect. It's actually kind of a big burr on our side that we need to get fixed.
A correction.
A correction needs to be made. Behind me at the New York store, it became the Colonial Theater around 1919, and actually was a motion picture theater for up until the 70s when it fell into disrepair, and actually was only rehabilitated during the 1990s. And if you could imagine, actually, there used to be a cattle drive, and cattle used to go right up the street behind here to the Beatty farm. But those were really the first buildings, and this was called Center Street at the time.
Oh,
it wasn't called Highland Avenue. And it basically terminated right here, and then Elm Street opened, and Alvin Pettibone actually built this building right here, which is Alducci's today, and he built it as a general goods and a pharmacy. He was an advocate, he was a pharmacist, and that was really, Alvin ran Pettibone Drugs until the 1920s when T.J. Healy bought it and opened a general store, and I think the Healy's Market was there until just before Alducci.
Yeah.
I think there was a Sears there for
late 80s, early 90s,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah, so it continued on long after his passing.
Okay.
And behind us actually was one of the staple businesses in the depot. Was built by the Davis family around 1884, and it was a Davis Tin Shop, which was operational until the early 1900s, and it became yet another movie theater. So for a little while we had two movie theaters. The Modern Theater across the street and the Colonial on this side. In 1955, when they changed its name to the Community Theater, it actually caught fire and was a total loss, and then they tore it down in 1958 to make room for a municipal parking lot that we see here behind us.
Okay. So this is a pretty nifty little historic section of town that I'm sure a lot of people probably overlook and don't think much about it, but really was quite integral to the history of Manchester and its development as a town.
Yeah, and then this building here, which is basically kind of the twin building to the Pettibone building, was built by John Coulter, and it was built as another general store. He really kind of concentrated more on building goods, paints, varnishes, and then the small building in between was built right after the turn of the century, probably about 1910, and that was the post office, and remained the post office until the 70s, actually. The building behind me was actually a hardware store owned by the Kendall family and then the Taylor family. It was actually, was the American Legion post for a number of years until the Legion closed down. We still have, of course, the VFW over on Depot Street, but this was the home of the American Legion.
One of the things we hope to do is go around to other parts of town and have you talk to us a little bit about the history of different areas that, again, probably most people just sort of drive by without really thinking about it, but town's over 250 years old, and a lot of things have happened. But one of the things that has impressed me over the past few years about the work you've done at the Historical Society is your use of social media and Facebook to promote the Historical Society and the history of the town. You post a number of pictures, like sort of old pictures of old buildings around town, and I guess where did you get the idea to do that, and how has that gone?
Well, in speaking of the data now, a lot of it came from trying to raise awareness, and social media has been a great tool to really take what's in our archives, to digitize it and put it out on a platform that not only can reach people who are no longer in Manchester, but also people who can't necessarily make it to a museum. And the museum model, I mean, a lot of them are struggling right now to find people to come and look at all the artifacts. Yeah. So one of the ways in the interim, which is a lot cheaper than having a building and more cost efficient, is just to be able to put it out on social media for feedback. We went with a closed group so that way we would kind of keep out the trolls, so to speak,
right.
And in the political discussion, right. So to speak.
No fake news here, huh?
Yeah, and then also to reach the younger generation, yeah. Because they are on social media. I mean, that's their that's a lot of times their source. So if you want the audience, go to where the audience is. Mm-hmm. And I found that going through town, the engagement, even though they don't necessarily participate in the online conversations that are going on, when I see them in private, I find that the Burnt students are actually looking at this, and they are discussing it amongst themselves, and going to these places and saying, "Hey, did you see that picture?" And "Hey, did you see this?" And "Hey, did you see that?" Because they didn't know that that was a movie theater that their grandparents went to.
Right. Great way of teaching history.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, we'll be visiting again with you, at different parts around town as we go forward, and it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of explore the history of the town together.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for your time.